Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for the Robert E. Howard Show. It is the Robert E. Howard Show once again. It's not the Robert E. Howard Show I was going to do. That I will do next week, and it'll probably be up Thursday or Friday or something. But today, I have to do this one because a couple days ago in the mail, I got a really awesome book. So let's talk about that. This is Fists of Iron, Round 1 by Robert E. Howard. So this is from the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press. This is the first volume of their series of Robert E. Howard's boxing stories. I believe this is going to be a complete set of Robert E. Howard's boxing stories, which I don't think anyone has done except for the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press. I could be wrong, but I don't think all of his boxing stories have ever been printed in one set of books, but they will be here. And this is one of the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press's ultimate editions, where they reprint some of their earlier editions that were printed in hardcover. I remember when these came out from Robert E. Howard Foundation Press. They're pretty hard to get now, those hardcovers. But we're getting the ultimate editions now, and the ultimate editions are not just reprints of those earlier books. Very often they are expanded with new material, so they're really cool. And it's nice to have the boxing stories reprinted once again, because they're pretty important to Robert E. Howard's fiction. He wrote a lot of boxing stories. So let's read the back of this. The ultimate collection of Robert E. Howard's boxing stories. Before Conan, before Solomon Kane, Robert E. Howard was going toe-to-toe with roughnecks at the local ice house, trading blows with oil-filled bruisers, seasoned pros, and anyone gutsy enough to step into the ring. Around town, folks called him Bob. In the ring, they called him unbeatable. Howard didn't just write about boxing, he lived it. Sculpted from sweat and grit, he trained hard, fought harder, and poured that same raw energy into every story he penned. He had a deep respect for the sport's brutal ballet, the science, the strategy, and the sheer willpower it demanded. But it was the iron men who haunted him most. Brawlers with fists like sledgehammers and skulls like anvils, who couldn't be knocked out and didn't know when to quit. Men who gave everything for glory and often paid the price with their sanity. Fists of Iron Round 1 kicks off a 4-volume series collecting Howard's explosive boxing tales. Tales penned by a man who knew exactly what it felt like to duck, weave, and land a haymaker. These are stories written with sweat in the ink and blood in the margins. Step into the ring with a master. Wow, Roger, that was very melodramatically written. That was kind of awesome. So, Robert E. Howard did box. He did do amateur boxing in the local ice house. It was basically a fight club where a bunch of guys got together and beat the heck out of each other, which doesn't seem like a hobby I think I would enjoy, Roger. Getting hit in the face isn't my favorite thing to do. And so I read instead. I read books instead and make dumb videos. It's less painful. But I'm not as macho as Robert E. Howard was. And he was fascinated by boxing. Boxing was his favorite sport. He knew all about boxing. He kept up with it. He knew all about, all the boxers and their histories. He was way into it. Very way into it since he boxed himself. And he did do a lot of physical training, not just to box, but also, just to fight off, anyone who might, give him trouble. He became kind of a big fella, Robert E. Howard. He didn't want to mess with him, really. And yeah, so he knew all about boxing. He had the experience of actually boxing. And he wrote a lot of boxing stories, because boxing stories and just sports stories in general were really popular uh, back in the 1920s and the 1930s, which makes sense, because this is back in the days when there was no television. So if you wanted to watch a boxing match or a baseball game or a football game, if you wanted to see these things, you had to go to the games. And if you couldn't go to the games, you listened to it on the radio if you could get the game or the boxing match on the radio, which you couldn't always. And so if you're really interested in sports, here are all these pulp magazines that were being published with stories about sports. So I can understand the popularity. There was no cable networks back then with 24-hour sporting events. It was, you go to the boxing match, hear it on the radio, or read about it in the magazines and the newspapers. That's what you got. And Robert Howard wrote this whole long series of boxing stories. He had a couple really fun characters, and he did some humorous boxing stories. He did some serious boxing stories, but he wrote a lot of them, and they have been published here and there over the years. Back in the 1970s with Zebra Books, they printed some boxing stories there, and some paperback volumes, a couple paperback volumes at least that I could think of, which is how I first discovered that he wrote boxing stories. And I knew that, there were boxing stories were a thing that existed, but mostly I knew about those from Jack London. But yeah, Robert E. Howard wrote a ton of them. And they've been reprinted here and there over the years, like I've said. But like I said, I don't believe I've ever seen a whole set of all of his boxing stories other than the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press. So this is really cool to have. This is going to be a 4-volume series, apparently. So that should cover everything. We've got this really cool Mark Wheatley cover. Mark Wheatley is doing all of the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press Ultimate Editions, so that's really cool. But what's in this first volume of boxing stories? Okay, so what do we have? The Brute Eternal, which is an introduction by Christopher Gruber, it looks like. The Boxing Tales of Robert E. Howard by Christopher Gruber is the introduction. Then we've got Fists of Iron, and what are the stories in here? The Spirit of Tom Molyneux, which is a story that's kind of a ghost story, and it's been reprinted here and there. I think that was reprinted in the Best Horror Stories of Robert E. Howard. We've got Double Cross, The Weeping Willow, The Right Hook, The Voice of Doom. That's a very Robert E. Howard sounding title. Crowd Horror, Iron Men, The Mark of a Bloody Hand, They Always Come Back. Didn't Stephen King write a story called that? I'm pretty sure they're very different stories. The Trail of the Snake. And we've also got poems in here about boxing. Kid Levine is Dead. Ah, Come On and Fight. There's a poem called The Cooling of Spike McCrew. Fables for Little Folks. The Champ, Slugger's Wow. And Dempsey Climbed into the Ring, which was originally untitled. In the Ring, the Fighting the Anaconda Kid, Down the Ages, John L. Sullivan, Jack Dempsey, the Duckers of Crosses, originally untitled, All the Crowd, which was originally untitled, and Where You Were a Setup and I Was a Ham. So lots of poems in here, none of which I think I've ever read. So that's one thing that I really love about these volumes is that they're publishing stuff that I've never seen, which is really cool. Robert E. Howard wrote a lot. He wrote a lot. But we've also got the appendix, different appendices. We've got early tales, variants and fragments. We've got articles and various odds and ends. And so this volume is packed with cool stuff. And a lot of this stuff I haven't read. And so I really look forward to this one. I've been looking forward to this. The Robert E. Howard Press is doing the boxing stories, and they're very soon they're also going to be starting to reprint the Breckenridge Elkins stories, which is really exciting to get those. But it'll be great to get all 4 volumes of these when they're published, because if you are interested in Robert E. Howard, and if you're watching this, you probably are. I mean, these are really important. These were a big part of his writing life. You know, he sold a lot of these. The boxing stories were a steady market for him for a long time, and so he put a lot of effort into these stories. They're not my favorite stories of his, of course. That would be his fantasy and sword and sorcery and horror stories, but they're really good. These are really entertaining stories. His boxing stories were. I don't have a lot of experience with a lot of the stuff in this volume, so this is going to be exciting to read, which hopefully I'll get to this year. I've got a lot of Robert E. Howard to read. They're putting these out at a fairly quick pace, which I appreciate. So yeah, just so you know, Fists of Iron, Round 1 by Robert E. Howard. You should get this book if you like Robert E. Howard. Okay, that's all for today. Catch me tomorrow for my weekly reading report, and I will catch you next time.